day my son almost married a woman who called his grandfather's tools junk in front of 240 people is a day I still think about every single morning when I pour my first cup of coffee. I'm 58 years old. I worked 31 years as an electrician in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've rewired houses in July heat that would make a grown man cry. I've crawled through attics full of fiberglass insulation without complaint. I raised my son Isaac, mostly by myself after his mother passed when he was 11, and I did it the way my own father raised me, quietly, steadily, without a lot of words, but never without showing up. My father, Pop, lived with us the last 4 years of my working life. He was 81, a retired machinist from Kannapolis, the kind of man who kept every tool he ever owned hanging on a pegboard in the garage, labeled in his handwriting with a black marker. Torque wrench, channel locks, ball peen. He could tell you exactly when he bought each one and what job it was for. That pegboard was his pride. When I was a boy, he'd bring me into that garage on Sunday mornings and teach me the name of every tool, one by one, like a prayer. Isaac knew all of this. He grew up in that garage, same as I did. When Isaac was 26, he met a woman named Whitney at a fundraising gala his company sponsored downtown. She was 31, worked in corporate communications for a real estate investment firm, drove a leased BMW, and had the kind of wardrobe that looked like it required a personal stylist. She was beautiful in a way that made people in restaurants look over. I understood why my son fell hard. She was polite to me the first few times we met. Firm handshake, remembered my name, asked follow-up questions about my work that sounded genuine. I thought, okay, this one has some substance. Pop met her at Thanksgiving, about 5 months into their relationship. He came out of his bedroom wearing his good flannel shirt, the navy one he saved for holidays, and he shook her hand with both of his, the way he did with people he was trying to make feel welcome. She smiled, said it was lovely to meet him. Dinner was fine, but afterward, when Pop went to bed early the way he always did, Whitney said something to Isaac in the kitchen that she didn't know I could hear from the hallway. She said, "Does he live here permanently?" Isaac said yes. She said, "I see." Just those 2 words. The way she said them told me everything, but I told myself I was overreacting. Old man, too sensitive. Isaac loves her. Give it time. I gave it 18 months. During those 18 months, I watched small things accumulate like water damage, quiet, invisible, until suddenly the ceiling falls in. She never once sat in the living room to watch television with Pop. She'd come over and drift toward the kitchen, then Isaac's bedroom, then anywhere he wasn't. When Pop told a story about Kannapolis, about the mill, about the men he worked with, she'd glance at her phone. Not rudely, just enough. The way you do when someone is talking and you've already decided what they have to say doesn't matter. She started calling Pop's garage the storage situation. She said it once in front of Isaac and me, laughing a little as if she was joking. We should really sort out the storage situation before the wedding. Isaac laughed too. I didn't. By the time Isaac proposed, which happened on a rooftop in Asheville with a ring I suspect cost more than my first truck, I had a feeling sitting low in my stomach that I couldn't shake. But I said nothing. He was my son. He was happy. Who was I to put my hand up? The engagement party was held at a venue in South Charlotte, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and Edison bulbs, and a bartender who knew what a proper old-fashioned was. 160 guests. Whitney's family had organized most of it. Her parents, Warren and Suzanne, were real estate developers from Raleigh. They arrived together, looking like they'd stepped out of a magazine, and Warren shook my hand the way men shake hands when they want you to know they have a firmer grip than you. Pop came in his good clothes, black slacks, his white dress shirt, his bolo tie with the turquoise stone that had belonged to his own father. He looked dignified. He looked like himself. I watched Whitney see him walk in. It was a quarter-second thing, barely anything, just her eyes going over him from head to toe, then moving away, like she'd noted something and filed it. The evening went well enough for the first 2 hours. People mingled. The food was good. Pop sat with some of Isaac's friends from his college years, guys who'd been to our house enough times to know him, and they included him in their conversations without making it seem like charity. I was grateful for that. Then Suzanne came over and sat beside Pop and started asking him, in that voice people use when they're performing kindness, what he used to do for work. Pop told her. Machinist, 34 years. Cannon Mills before the buyout. Suzanne said, "Oh, how interesting," and then turned to find someone else to talk to within about 90 seconds. Pop didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't show it. He was sipping his sweet tea and watching the room with the calm expression he always had, the one that made me think he understood things about people that he'd long since stopped trying to explain. It was near the end of the evening, maybe 9:30, when Whitney and her mother were standing near the display table where the caterers had set up the engagement photos. One of the photos showed Isaac and Pop in our garage, laughing, Isaac holding a socket wrench, Pop pointing at something on the pegboard. It was one of my favorite pictures. Isaac had printed it and included it in the display himself. I was standing about 15 feet away, talking to my brother, when Whitney's mother leaned toward the photo and said something to Whitney that I didn't catch. And Whitney laughed and said, loud enough that the 3 or 4 people nearby could hear, "That garage, my God! It looks like a hardware store threw up all his grandfather's junk. I keep telling Isaac we're dealing with that after the wedding." Her mother laughed too. I watched Pop standing 4 feet to her left, just inside her peripheral vision, holding his sweet tea. He had heard every word. I know because I saw his hand tighten on the glass. Just once. Then he set it down on the nearest table, very carefully, and he walked toward the exit with the unhurried dignity of a man who has been insulted before and survived it. I did not follow him immediately. I stood still for a moment, doing what you do when your body catches up to what your ears just processed. Then I walked over to where Whitney was still talking to her mother, and I said calmly, "He heard you." She looked at me. "He heard you," I said again, and I walked away. Isaac found me outside with Pop 20 minutes later. Pop was sitting on a bench near the parking lot, looking at the sky. I was sitting beside him. We weren't talking. We'd been together long enough to know when words weren't the thing needed. Isaac crouched in front of his grandfather and said, "Pop, I'm sorry." Pop put his hand on Isaac's face, the way he used to do when Isaac was a boy, palm against the cheek. He said, "You didn't do a thing wrong, son." Then he looked at Isaac for a long moment and said, "But you've got a decision to make." Isaac drove Pop home that night. He didn't go back to the party. The next 2 weeks were the hardest I've ever watched my son go through, and I've watched him go through some hard things. He and Whitney had a series of conversations I was not present for, but I know what the shape of them was, because Isaac came to my house 3 times in those 2 weeks looking like a man trying to balance a building on his shoulders. He wanted me to tell him what to do. I wouldn't. He was 30 years old. This was his life. My job was to stay in my lane and be there when he pulled over. What I did do was take him to the garage one evening. We sat on the stools in front of Pop's pegboard, the way we're used to when he was a teenager, and I said, "Tell me what you're afraid of." He said he was afraid of making a mistake he couldn't undo. I said, "Which one?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the pegboard for a long time, looked at the labels in Pop's handwriting, the ball peen, the channel locks, the pipe wrench Pop had carried in his truck for 20 years and handed to me the day I got my journeyman's license, which I had then handed to Isaac when he turned 21, because that's how we do things in this family. Isaac said she called it junk. I said, "Yeah, she wasn't talking about tools." "No," I said, "she wasn't." He sat with that for a few minutes. Then he said, "I think I've known for a while. I just didn't want to see it. That's the part that broke me a little, as a father. Not the anger, the grief, because I knew that feeling. The thing where you love someone, you want so much for the picture in your head to be true that you start working around the evidence. I'd done it too. Different situation, different person, different decade. But I knew exactly what it cost to finally stop. He called off the engagement 12 days after the party. Whitney did not take it quietly. There were phone calls, texts, an email from her father to Isaac that used words like commitment and obligation. and included toward the end a veiled suggestion that Isaac had wasted her time and her family's resources, and that there might be consequences if the matter wasn't handled appropriately. That email was a mistake, because Isaac showed it to me, and I had 31 years of experience dealing with people who use the word consequences when they don't actually have any cards in their hand. I had him forward the email to an attorney friend of mine, a woman named Priscilla, who had done some contract work for the electrical union I belonged to for 20 years. She sent one letter in response. Calm, precise, and effective. We never heard from Warren again. There was one more thing that happened that I have not yet mentioned, and it matters. The week after Isaac called off the engagement, Whitney came to my house. I was not there. I was at Pop's doctor's appointment. But she let herself into the garage using the keypad code she'd gotten from Isaac months before. Isaac didn't know she'd done this. What she did in that garage was take a photograph of the pegboard. Then she sent it to Isaac with a text that said, "This is what you're choosing over a real future." I found out about this because Isaac showed me the text, and I asked him to look at the security camera I had installed in the garage 2 years prior after some neighborhood tool thefts. There she was, on camera, in my garage. Without permission. She had not taken anything. She had not damaged anything. But she had walked through the space, and I saw her stand in front of the pegboard, and I saw her expression, and it was contempt. Pure and uncomplicated. I showed the footage to Priscilla. Priscilla sent a second letter. That was the last we heard from Whitney. Pop turned 83 that March. We threw him a small party, just family and a few of his friends from the Canaveras years. Men in their 80s who drove up in trucks and wore their good shirts and ate my potato salad and argued about college basketball with the comfortable ferocity of people who've known each other long enough to disagree without threat. Isaac was there. He sat beside Pop the whole evening, not performing anything, just present. At one point I looked across the room and saw them leaning together over something on the workbench, Pop pointing at a fitting, Isaac nodding. The same scene I had watched 100 times when Isaac was a child. The same posture, the same patience in Pop's hands. I had to walk outside for a minute. I am not a man who cries easily. I'm the product of men who were taught that composure is a form of respect, that you don't bring your falling apart into spaces where other people are trying to hold themselves together. My father never cried in front of me until the day my mother died. I cried once in my truck after my wife's funeral, and then I went home and cooked my son dinner. And I didn't cry again for 3 years. But standing on my back porch that night, listening to the low murmur of old men talking in my garage, I let myself feel the full weight of what had almost happened. How close we came to that garage being emptied out, the pegboard taken down, Pop's tools called junk by someone who had the authority of marriage and the confidence of someone who had never once needed to know how anything actually worked. How close we came to Isaac spending his life next to someone who looked at his grandfather and saw a problem to be managed. Not close enough for it to happen, but close enough. There is something I want to say here, because I have been thinking about how to say it for a long time. I know how it looks from the outside. A working-class man, a retired grandfather, a son who chose family loyalty over an ambitious woman. The version of their story that certain people want to tell is simple. The unsophisticated family couldn't accept someone from a different world. The snobbery goes both ways. And who's to say? I have thought hard about whether that's true, and I don't believe it is. Whitney could have been a corporate attorney or a kindergarten teacher or a Marine. It would not have mattered. What mattered was not what she did or where she came from. What mattered was the way she looked at an 80-year-old man who had spent his life making things work with his hands and decided, without knowing one single thing about him, that he was beneath her notice. That is not a class difference. That is a character difference. Pop is still with us. He still goes into the garage every morning, slow now but steady, checks on his tools the way a farmer checks on his land. He has been teaching Isaac's younger cousin how to use the torque wrench. The pegboard is still labeled in his handwriting. Isaac is doing well. He is not yet in another serious relationship, and he seems at peace with that. He told me recently that he thinks he spent too long in his 20s trying to become someone he thought he was supposed to be, and that calling off that engagement was the first thing he'd done in years that felt entirely like himself. I told him that made sense. I told him that was called growing up. He asked me if I ever regretted not saying something sooner, not warning him more directly before it got as far as it did. I thought about it honestly, the way he deserved me to. I said, no, because you wouldn't have heard it if I'd said it, and you needed to see it for yourself. He said, I saw it the minute she called Pop's tools junk. I said, I know. I just needed a few weeks to let myself admit it. That's about right, I said. That's about how long it takes when you love someone. We were in the garage when we had this conversation. It was an evening in November, getting dark early the way it does, the overhead fluorescent light making everything look a little more solid than it does in daylight. Pop was inside watching the news. From where we stood, we could hear the television through the window. Isaac picked up the pipe wrench, turned it over in his hands the way he used to as a kid. Pop's writing is fading on some of these, he said. I know, I said. I've been thinking about going over them. He set the wrench back on its hook, exactly where it belonged. Let me do it, he said. I know his handwriting. I didn't say anything. I just stepped back and let him look at the pegboard, at all those tools in their places, at 30 years of his grandfather's handwriting in black marker. And I thought, some things get handed down without anyone making a speech about it. Some things just move from hand to hand, generation to generation, quietly the way the good things always do. Whitney is still in Charlotte, as far as I know. She has a new job, new apartment, probably a new man. I wish her nothing bad, but I do think about what she walked away from. On those nights when I'm in the garage with my son, the two of us fixing something or not fixing anything, just standing in the light and talking about nothing in particular. She walked away from this. She just never knew what it was worth. I've been thinking about what I actually want to say here, because the easy version of this story is a simple one. Bad person does bad thing. Bad person says can't be consequences. Good people win. That version is satisfying for about 30 seconds. But that's not really what happened, and it's not what I took away from it. What I keep coming back to is the moment Pop set his glass down on that table. Carefully, without a word. That single gesture, a man choosing not to react, not to escalate, not to give someone the satisfaction of watching him crumble. That right there is something it took me 30 years to learn how to do. He didn't learn it from a book. He learned it from 34 years of hard work in a loud mill with men who tested each other every single day. You develop a kind of stillness when you spent a lifetime doing things that actually matter. You stop needing to win the moment because you already know who you are. Whitney didn't know that. And that's what I mean when I say this wasn't about class or money or background. She looked at an 83-year-old man with calloused hands and a bolo tie, and she made a decision about his worth in about 4 seconds. That is a failure of intelligence, not just character. Real intelligence, the kind that actually serves you in life, is the ability to look at something or someone and ask, what is actually here, before you decide what it means. She skipped that step entirely, and it cost her everything she thought she was building. Isaac paid a price too, and I don't want to skip over that. He loved her, or he loved who he believed she was, which is a real thing even when it's built on incomplete information. Watching your son grieve a future he planned is one of the harder parts of being a father. You want to fix it. You want to tell him the pain has a timeline. All you can actually do is stay close and let him work through it at his own pace. But here's what I noticed about Isaac in the months after. He got clearer, not harder, clearer. Like something that had been slightly out of focus came back into resolution. He started showing up to the garage again without being asked. He started asking Pop questions about the machines, about the mill years, about things he'd been too busy or too distracted to ask before. He was paying attention in a way he hadn't been for a couple of years. That's what happens when you stop spending your energy maintaining a version of yourself that doesn't fit. You get that energy back, and you put it somewhere real. The tools are still on that pegboard. Isaac retraced Pop's handwriting with a fresh marker, every single label, in his grandfather's exact script. He did it one Saturday afternoon, while Pop sat on the stool and watched, and told him if he was getting the letters right. I stood in the doorway and did not say a word. That pegboard is worth more than anything Whitney walked away from. Not because of what it cost, but because of what it holds. Every lesson about showing up, doing the work, taking care of what matters, passing something forward. That's the whole thing right there on a piece of wood in a garage in Charlotte. Some people look at that and see junk. That's their loss. It always was.